Baby discovered a bear. Cub locked in a school locker. What Baby did next left teachers crying. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the empty hallway of Riverside Elementary School. Jessica Brooks sat on the small wooden bench near the main entrance, her tired eyes watching the clock tick past 4:30. Beside her, little Lily Morgan played quietly with her stuffed rabbit, humming a soft tune that only she knew the words to. The toddler, barely 2 years old, had been waiting with Jessica for almost an hour now. Her mother had called earlier, stuck in unexpected traffic, apologizing profusely for the delay. Jessica didn't mind, though. After teaching kindergarten all day, sitting in the peaceful quiet with this gentle child felt almost therapeutic. The school had that peculiar emptiness that buildings get when they're meant to be full of life, but suddenly aren't. The usual chaos of children's laughter and footsteps had faded hours ago, leaving behind only the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of settling wood. Jessica watched Lily toddle around in small circles, her tiny sneakers making soft padding sounds on the polished floor. The child's blonde curls bounced with each step, catching the golden light that streamed through the tall windows. There was something magical about this time of day, Jessica thought, when the world seemed to slow down and breathe. Then came the sound. It was so faint at first that Jessica almost dismissed it as her imagination. A soft scratching, like fingernails on metal, coming from somewhere down the hallway. She tilted her head, listening more carefully. There it was again. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. The rhythm was too deliberate to be the building settling or the wind against the windows. Jessica stood up slowly, her teacher instincts kicking in. Maybe a student had left something behind, or perhaps the janitor was still working in one of the classrooms. But Lily had heard it too. The toddler stopped her circling and turned her head toward the sound, her big blue eyes growing wider with curiosity. Without warning, she began toddling down the hallway, her stuffed rabbit dragging behind her on the floor. Jessica quickly followed, not wanting to lose sight of the child. The scratching grew louder as they moved deeper into the building. Past the bulletin boards covered in colorful artwork and motivational posters. The sound seemed to be coming from the row of lockers near the science classroom. Jessica caught up with Lily just as the child stopped in front of locker number 47. The metal door was slightly bent at the bottom corner, as if someone had tried to pry it open. The scratching was definitely coming from inside. Jessica's heart began to beat a little faster. What could possibly be trapped in there? A bird that had somehow gotten into the building? A squirrel? She reached for her phone, thinking she should call the principal or maybe animal control. But Lily was already reaching up toward the locker's combination dial with her tiny fingers. "No, sweetie, don't touch that," Jessica said gently. But then she noticed something strange. The locker wasn't actually locked. The combination dial was spinning freely, and the latch wasn't fully engaged. Someone had closed it but hadn't secured it properly. The scratching became more urgent, accompanied now by a soft whimpering sound that made Jessica's chest tighten with concern. Whatever was in there was alive and frightened. Lily looked up at Jessica with those innocent eyes, then back at the locker. She made a soft cooing sound, the same gentle noise she made when comforting her stuffed animals. It was as if she understood that something inside needed help. Jessica took a deep breath and slowly reached for the locker handle. Her hand trembled slightly as she grasped the cold metal. She could feel Lily watching her intently, waiting. With one quick motion, she pulled the door open. What she saw inside made her gasp and step back involuntarily. Curled up in the bottom of the locker, trembling and covered in dust, was a bear cub. Not a teddy bear, not a toy, but an actual living bear cub. It couldn't have been more than a few months old. its dark fur matted and its eyes wide with fear. The creature looked up at them with an expression so vulnerable, so utterly lost, that Jessica felt her heart break a little. How in the world had a bear cub ended up in a school locker? The cub made another soft whimpering sound, pressing itself further into the corner of the locker. It was clearly terrified, its small body shaking with each breath. Jessica's mind raced with questions and concerns. Was it dangerous? Should she close the locker and call for help? But before she could decide what to do, Lily did something that would stay with Jessica for the rest of her life. The toddler dropped her stuffed rabbit and sat down cross-legged on the floor in front of the open locker. She didn't reach out to touch the cub, didn't make any sudden movements. Instead, she began to hum again, that same soft, wordless tune she'd been humming earlier. Her voice was barely above a whisper, gentle and soothing like a lullaby. The cub's ears perked up slightly, its trembling beginning to slow. Lily continued humming, swaying slightly from side to side, her eyes never leaving the frightened animal. Jessica watched in amazement as the bear cub slowly, cautiously, began to uncurl itself. Its nose twitched as it sniffed the air, trying to understand this small human who showed no fear, only kindness. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a half-eaten graham cracker, leftover from her afternoon snack. She placed it carefully on the floor between herself and the locker, then scooted back a few inches, still humming her gentle song. The cub watched the cracker for a long moment, then looked at Lily, then back at the cracker. Hunger finally won over fear, and the small creature crept forward just enough to grab the treat with its tiny paws. As it nibbled on the graham cracker, some of the tension seemed to leave its small body. Lily clapped her hands softly, a quiet celebration that made the cub look up at her with what almost seemed like gratitude. Jessica found herself holding her breath, afraid that any movement or sound might break this impossible, beautiful moment. She thought about all the safety protocols she should be following, all the people she should be calling, but something held her back. There was magic happening here, a connection between two innocent souls that transcended species and logic. The late afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, bathing the hallway in warm golden light, making the whole scene feel like something out of a dream. The cub finished the cracker and licked its paws clean, its dark eyes now focused entirely on Lily. The toddler slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, extended her small hand toward the animal, not to grab or pet, just to offer. The cub sniffed her fingers tentatively, its wet nose barely touching her skin. Lily giggled softly, a sound like tinkling bells that made even Jessica smile despite her concern. The cub seemed to relax even more at the sound, as if recognizing that this tiny human meant no harm. Minutes passed like this, the two youngsters studying each other with the pure curiosity that only the very young possess. Jessica noticed details she hadn't seen before in her initial shock. The cub had a small white patch on its chest, shaped almost like a star. Its paws were oversized for its body, suggesting it still had growing to do. But most striking were its eyes, deep brown and filled with an intelligence that seemed far beyond its age. This wasn't just some wild animal. This was a thinking, feeling creature that had somehow ended up in the most unlikely of places. Lily began to tell the cub a story, her toddler words mostly incomprehensible, but delivered with great enthusiasm. She gestured with her hands, pointed at her stuffed rabbit, and occasionally paused to see if the cub was listening. Remarkably, it seemed to be. The small bear had now ventured completely out of the locker and was sitting just a foot away from Lily, its head tilted as if trying to understand her babbling narrative. Jessica had to cover her mouth to suppress a laugh when Lily picked up her stuffed rabbit and made it dance, causing the cub to rear back slightly in surprise before leaning forward again with interest. The peace of the moment was suddenly interrupted by footsteps echoing from the main entrance. Jessica's heart jumped as she recognized the heavy, measured gait of Jacob Bennett, the school's groundskeeper. Jacob had worked at Riverside Elementary for over 30 years, and there wasn't much that surprised him anymore. But as he rounded the corner and saw the scene before him, even his weathered face showed shock. "Sweet mercy," he whispered, stopping in his tracks. His eyes moved from Jessica to Lily to the bear cub, trying to process what he was seeing. The cub, startled by the new arrival, began to retreat toward the locker, but Lily made a soft shushing sound and patted the floor beside her. Amazingly, the cub stopped and looked back at her, clearly torn between fear and trust. Jacob slowly lowered himself to one knee, his joints creaking with the effort. He studied the cub with knowing eyes, and Jessica saw recognition dawn on his face. "I know this little one," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "This is the cub from Miller's Woods, the one whose mama was hit by that truck 2 weeks ago. Wildlife Services have been looking for him everywhere." The weight of his words settled over them like a heavy blanket. This small creature wasn't just lost, it was orphaned, alone in a world that had suddenly become incomprehensibly large and dangerous. Jessica felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched the cub huddle closer to Lily, as if sensing that these humans understood its plight. The toddler, though too young to fully grasp the situation, seemed to instinctively know that the little bear needed comfort. She began humming again, that same soothing melody that had first calmed the frightened animal. Jacob pulled out his phone, but before dialing, he paused. "You know, in all my years here, I've seen a lot of strange things. But this," he gestured at Lily and the cub, "this is something special. That little girl has a gift, Miss Brooks. The way that cub trusts her, it's not natural. Or maybe it's the most natural thing in the world, and we adults have just forgotten how to see it." He was right, Jessica realized. In their adult world of rules and fears and logical thinking, they'd lost something essential. But Lily, in her innocence, still possessed that pure connection to other living things. She didn't see a potentially dangerous wild animal. She saw a scared baby who needed help, and somehow the cub recognized this and responded to it. The two of them had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, two young souls offering comfort in a world that often seemed too big and frightening. Jacob made his call to Wildlife Services, speaking in low tones to avoid disturbing the peaceful scene. While they waited, he told them more about the cub's story. The mother bear had been a familiar sight in Miller's Woods, a gentle creature who avoided humans and taught her cub to do the same. But the accident had changed everything. The cub had been spotted several times since then, growing thinner and more desperate, venturing closer to town in search of food. How it had ended up in the school, in a locker no less, was still a mystery. As if understanding they were talking about him, the cub made a soft sound and crept even closer to Lily. The toddler reached into her other pocket and produced a slightly squished banana slice, another remnant of her snack. The cub took it gratefully, and as it ate, Lily gently, ever so gently, placed her small hand on its head. The cub froze for a moment, then relaxed, allowing the touch. Jessica heard Jacob's sharp intake of breath. Even he, with all his experience with wildlife, recognized how extraordinary this moment was. The story of how the cub ended up in the locker began to take shape as Jacob made more calls. Apparently, earlier that day, during lunch recess, some fifth graders had reported seeing a small bear near the playground. The teachers had quickly ushered everyone inside, and animal control had been called. But by the time they arrived, the cub was nowhere to be found. Everyone assumed it had returned to the woods. No one could have imagined it had somehow found its way into the building. "But who put him in the locker?" Jessica asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at her. "And why?" Jacob's expression darkened slightly. He had his suspicions, he said, but nothing concrete. There had been reports of some older students talking about helping the orphaned cub, but teachers had dismissed it as just talk. Kids often had elaborate plans that never came to fruition. But apparently, someone had actually attempted something, though what exactly remained unclear. As they waited and watched, Lily continued her gentle interaction with the cub. She showed it her stuffed rabbit, demonstrated how it could hop, and even tried to teach the cub to clap its paws together. The sight was so endearing that Jessica found herself recording it on her phone, knowing that no one would believe this story without proof. The cub, for its part, seemed fascinated by everything Lily did, watching her with those intelligent brown eyes and occasionally mimicking her movements in its own clumsy way. The sun was setting now, painting the hallway in deeper shades of gold and orange. The cub had grown comfortable enough to lie down, its head resting near Lily's knee. The toddler continued to pet it gently, her touch so light it barely disturbed the animal's fur. There was something profound about the scene, something that spoke to the fundamental connection between all living things. In this moment, species didn't matter, age didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the simple act of one creature comforting another. Jessica thought about her years of teaching, all the lessons she'd tried to impart about kindness and empathy. But nothing she could ever say in a classroom would be as powerful as what Lily was demonstrating right now. This wasn't learned behavior. This was pure instinct, the kind of compassion that exists before the world teaches us to be afraid. The cub, too, was operating on instinct, recognizing safety and kindness despite its recent trauma. Together they were writing their own story of trust and healing. Jacob received another call and stepped away to answer it. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "They found something," he said quietly. "Security footage from this afternoon. You're not going to believe who put that cub in the locker." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. It was Connor Adams, the boy from the special education program. Jessica knew Connor well. He was a 7th grader with autism who often struggled with social interactions but had a remarkable connection with animals. He volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends and could often be found during lunch sitting alone, feeding birds or watching squirrels. The idea that he would trap an animal in a locker seemed completely out of character. But then again, Connor's way of thinking didn't always align with conventional logic. "There's more," Jacob continued. "The footage shows him leading the cub into the building using a trail of food. He wasn't trying to hurt it. He was trying to hide it, keep it safe until he could figure out what to do. He knew animal control might put it down, since it had been approaching humans. In his mind, the locker was temporary protection." The groundskeeper shook his head. Poor kid was apparently planning to come back after school with supplies, but his mother picked him up early for a doctor's appointment. He must be beside himself with worry. The revelation changed everything. What had seemed like a cruel act was actually a misguided attempt at kindness. Connor, in his unique way of seeing the world, had tried to save the cub, but hadn't thought through the consequences. Jessica felt a wave of empathy for the boy, imagining his distress at not being able to return as planned. She made a mental note to speak with him tomorrow, to make sure he knew the cub was safe, and that his intentions, while flawed in execution, came from a good place. Wildlife services arrived just as Lily's mother finally made it to the school. The reunion between mother and daughter was touching, but what happened next was even more so. Lily refused to leave until she knew the cub would be okay. She stood firmly, all 2.5 feet of her. Between the wildlife officers and the cub, her small arms spread wide in protection. The cub, seeming to sense her defensive stance, pressed closer to her leg. The lead officer, a woman named Sarah, who had years of experience with rescued wildlife, knelt down to Lily's level. She explained in simple terms that the cub needed special care, that there was a place where it could be safe and learn to be a proper bear. Lily listened seriously, her head tilted just like the cub's had been earlier. Then she asked, in her broken toddler speech, if she could visit. Sarah smiled and promised that once the cub was settled, they could arrange a visit. What followed was perhaps the most touching goodbye Jessica had ever witnessed. Lily hugged her stuffed rabbit, whispered something to it, then placed it gently in front of the cub. The little bear sniffed the toy, then looked up at Lily with those expressive eyes. The toddler patted its head one more time, then stepped back, allowing the officers to approach. The cub picked up the stuffed rabbit in its mouth, holding it carefully as Sarah gently lifted it into a specially designed carrier. Even as the door closed, the cub's eyes remained on Lily, and the toy remained clutched in its paws. The hallway felt impossibly empty after they left. Lily's mother held her daughter close, tears streaming down her face as Jessica and Jacob explained what had happened. She couldn't believe what her baby had done, the courage and compassion she'd shown. Lily, for her part, seemed satisfied that her new friend was going somewhere safe. She kept asking about visiting, making her mother promise repeatedly that they would go see the baby bear soon. As they prepared to leave, Jacob pulled Jessica aside. "I've been doing this job for 3 decades, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've seen kids come and go, watch them grow up, make mistakes, learn lessons. But today I saw something I'll never forget. That little girl reminded me why I love this job, why I love being around children. They see the world as it should be, not as it is. They don't see danger or difference. They just see another soul that needs love." Jessica nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought about Connor, about his desperate attempt to save the cub, and about Lily's pure response to a creature in need. Both children, in their own ways, had shown more humanity than most adults she knew. They'd acted from a place of love, even if imperfectly, and that was something worth celebrating. The next morning, the school was buzzing with the story. Everyone had their own version of events, each more elaborate than the last. But Jessica noticed something beautiful happening. Instead of fear or anger about a wild animal being in the school, the conversation centered on compassion. Students wanted to know if the cub was okay, if it would survive without its mother. Teachers used the opportunity to talk about wildlife conservation, about coexistence, about the importance of proper channels for helping animals in distress. Connor arrived at school with his mother, both of them anxious and apologetic. The principal had already decided not to pursue any disciplinary action, recognizing that the boy's intentions had been pure, if misguided. When Connor learned that the cub was safe and being cared for, he broke down in tears of relief. Jessica made sure to tell him about Lily's interaction with the cub, how gentle and calm it had been, how his act of trying to save it had led to something beautiful. The boy's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire school. What happened next was unexpected and wonderful. Connor asked if he could meet Lily to thank her for helping his bear. When the toddler arrived that afternoon to visit Jessica's classroom, Connor was waiting with a gift. He'd spent all day drawing a picture of the cub, remarkably detailed and lifelike, showing it happy and healthy in a forest setting. Lily clutched the drawing like a treasure, and in her simple way, told Connor about giving the bear her rabbit. Connor solemnly promised to buy her a new one, but Lily shook her head. The bear needed it more, she explained in her broken sentences. The local news picked up the story, but Jessica was careful to shield both children from too much attention. The focus, she insisted, should be on the message, not the messengers. And what a message it was. In a world that often seemed divided and harsh, two children had shown that compassion transcends age, ability, and even species. They'd demonstrated that sometimes the most profound acts of kindness come from the most unexpected places. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sent updates on the cub, now officially named Star for the marking on its chest. It was thriving, learning essential survival skills, and would eventually be released in a protected area far from roads and human settlements. They sent photos of Star playing with enrichment toys, and in every picture the stuffed rabbit was visible nearby. It had become the cub's comfort object, a reminder of the kindness it had experienced in its darkest moment. Lily visited Star several times over the following months, always accompanied by her mother and Jessica. Each visit was magical, watching the cub grow stronger and more independent while still maintaining that special connection with the little girl who'd shown it such tenderness. Connor came too, finally getting to see the bear he'd tried so hard to save. The cub seemed to recognize him, or perhaps it just responded to his gentle energy, allowing him to feed it through the safety barrier. The story could have ended there, a heartwarming tale of childhood compassion and second chances, but life had one more surprise in store. 6 months later, on the day Star was to be released into the wild, something extraordinary happened. The rehabilitation center had chosen a location deep in a protected forest, far from civilization. A small group had gathered to witness the release, including Lily and her family, Connor and his mother Jessica, and Jacob. As the carrier door opened, Star emerged slowly, now 3 times the size it had been that day in the locker. It sniffed the air, took a few tentative steps, then stopped. Turning back, it looked directly at Lily, who was watching from a safe distance. The bear made a soft sound, not unlike the whimper they'd first heard in the locker, but this time it seemed like a greeting, or perhaps a goodbye. Lily waved, whispered, "Bye-bye, baby bear," and Star turned and lumbered into the forest. But it didn't go far. About 20 feet into the tree line, Star stopped again and looked back. In its mouth was the stuffed rabbit, still carried after all these months. The bear set it down gently on a visible rock, gave it one last sniff, then disappeared into the deeper woods. It was as if Star knew the toy belonged to the human world, to Lily's world, and was returning it as a final gesture of thanks. Lily retrieved her rabbit later, holding it tight, understanding in her young way that her friend was saying goodbye properly this time. The impact of that day in the school hallway rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. Jessica incorporated the story into her teaching, using it to help children understand empathy and the importance of seeking help when trying to do good. Connor became more confident, his act of compassion validated rather than punished, and he went on to volunteer regularly at the Wildlife Center. His unique perspective and deep connection with animals made him invaluable in caring for orphaned and injured wildlife. Lily, though still very young, seemed to carry that experience with her as she grew. Her mother reported that she showed unusual kindness to all living things, from insects to neighborhood cats. She couldn't remember the details as she got older, but the feeling remained, that deep understanding that all creatures deserve compassion. The stuffed rabbit sat on her shelf, a reminder of a friendship that transcended species, and touched everyone who witnessed it. Jacob, the old groundskeeper, said it best one day as he and Jessica watched the children play at recess. "You know, I've been thinking about that day a lot," he said, his eyes distant with memory. "We spend so much time teaching kids to be careful, to be afraid, to protect themselves. And that's important, sure, but sometimes I wonder if we teach them too well. That little Lily, she hadn't learned to be afraid yet. She just saw a scared baby that needed help, and Connor, he saw an injustice and tried to fix it the only way he knew how. Maybe we could all learn something from that. Maybe the world would be better if we were a little less careful and a little more kind." Jessica couldn't agree more. The incident had changed her too, made her look at her students differently. She saw now that each child had an incredible capacity for compassion, sometimes expressed in unexpected ways. Connor's autism didn't make him less capable of empathy. It perhaps made him more so, allowing him to connect with the cub in a way others might not have. And Lily's age didn't make her response naive. It made it pure, untainted by the fears and prejudices that adults accumulate. The school implemented new programs in the wake of the incident. They partnered with the Wildlife Center for educational visits, teaching children about local animals and what to do if they encountered them. They also started a compassion project, where students could share stories of kindness they'd witnessed or performed. The locker where Star had been found was painted with a beautiful mural depicting the cub and Lily, a permanent reminder of the magic that had happened there. Years later, when Lily was old enough to understand the full story, she would sometimes stand in front of that mural, trying to remember. The details were fuzzy, like a dream half recalled, but the feeling remained strong. She knew she had been part of something special, something that had touched many lives. Her mother would show her the video Jessica had taken, and Lily would watch in wonder at her younger self. So small, yet so brave, comforting a frightened creature with nothing but humming and graham crackers. Connor, now in high school, had become something of a legend. The boy who tried to save a bear became the young man who dedicated his life to wildlife conservation. He'd learned from his mistake, understanding now the importance of proper procedures and safety, but he never lost that driving need to help creatures in distress. He often spoke at elementary schools, telling his version of the story, emphasizing both the importance of compassion and the necessity of seeking adult help. The Wildlife Center created a special program in honor of the incident, called Star's Friends, where children could learn about orphaned wildlife and how to properly help animals in need. They used the story of Star, Connor, and Lily as a teaching tool, showing that while the impulse to help is beautiful, it needs to be channeled correctly. Many children who went through the program went on to become volunteers, creating a new generation of wildlife advocates. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the adults who witnessed it. Teachers throughout the district began looking at their problem students differently, wondering what compassion might be hiding behind challenging behavior. Parents reconsidered their quick judgments about other people's children. And everyone who heard the story was reminded that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, in the most unexpected forms. The day had started as an ordinary afternoon in an empty school hallway. It had become something extraordinary, a testament to the power of innocence and compassion. 2 children, 1 bear cub, and a handful of adults had created a moment of pure magic, the kind that reminds us why we're here, what we're capable of when we lead with love instead of fear. The tears that had been shed that day weren't tears of sadness or fear, but tears of recognition, of remembering what it means to be truly human. As Jessica reflected on it all, sitting in her empty classroom after another long day of teaching, she realized that Lily and Connor had taught her the most important lesson of her career. Children don't need to be taught compassion, they're born with it. What they need is for adults to nurture it, to celebrate it, and sometimes, just sometimes, to get out of the way and let it shine. The bear cub in the locker had been a crisis that became a blessing, a moment of fear that transformed into a lesson in love. The story spread far beyond their small town, touching hearts across the country. Letters poured in from people who'd been inspired to act with more kindness, to look for opportunities to help, to see the world through the eyes of a child. Some shared their own stories of unexpected animal encounters, of children showing remarkable bravery and compassion. It became clear that what had happened at Riverside Elementary wasn't unique. It was simply a beautiful example of something that happens every day when we allow compassion to guide our actions. One letter particularly touched Jessica. It was from an elderly woman who'd been a teacher for 40 years before retiring. She wrote about how the story had reminded her why she'd become a teacher in the first place. Not to fill young minds with facts and figures, but to nurture the inherent goodness in every child. She shared her own story of a student who'd hidden injured birds in his backpack, trying to nurse them back to health during class. Instead of punishing him, she'd helped him connect with a local veterinarian, channeling his compassion into productive action. That student had grown up to become a renowned wildlife biologist. The ripples continued to spread. A children's book was written about the incident, with proceeds going to wildlife rehabilitation centers. Schools across the state implemented compassion curricula, using Star's story as a cornerstone. Wildlife experts noted an increase in proper reporting of animals in distress, with children especially aware of the correct procedures. The message was clear. Compassion is powerful, but it's most effective when combined with knowledge and appropriate action. Star thrived in the wild, occasionally spotted by hikers who reported seeing a bear with a distinctive white star on its chest. These sightings became legendary, with people traveling from far away hoping to glimpse the famous bear. The Forest Service had to implement new guidelines to prevent people from trying to interact with Star, emphasizing that while the bear's story was heartwarming, it was now a wild animal that needed to be respected from a distance. Meanwhile, life at Riverside Elementary continued, forever changed by that afternoon. New students heard the story from older ones, each adding their own embellishments until it became something of a school mythology. But the core message remained consistent. Kindness matters, compassion is powerful, and sometimes the smallest among us can teach the greatest lessons. Teachers noticed a shift in the school culture, a greater emphasis on empathy and understanding, less bullying and more cooperation. Lily grew into a confident, compassionate young girl who couldn't quite remember the details of her famous encounter, but felt its impact in her bones. She volunteered at animal shelters, participated in environmental cleanups, and showed remarkable empathy for classmates who struggled socially or academically. Her mother often said that the bear incident hadn't changed Lily. It had simply revealed who she'd always been. The little girl who'd hummed to a frightened cub had grown into a young woman who brought comfort wherever she went. Connor's journey was equally inspiring. The boy who'd been labeled as different, who'd struggled to connect with his peers, had found his calling. His unique way of seeing the world, once viewed as a limitation, became his greatest strength. He understood animals in a way few others did, recognizing their needs and fears with an intuition that couldn't be taught. He graduated high school with honors and received a full scholarship to study wildlife biology, his essay about the bear incident moving the selection committee to tears. The locker itself became something of a shrine. Students would sometimes leave small offerings there, pictures of animals they'd helped, stories of kindness they'd witnessed. The mural was touched up annually by the art class, each year adding small details that reflected current students' interpretations of the story. Some years Star looked fiercer, other years more cuddly, but always the image of Lily remained the same, a tiny figure radiating calm and love. Jacob, the groundskeeper who'd witnessed it all, became the unofficial keeper of the story. He'd tell it to new staff members, to visiting dignitaries, to anyone who would listen. Each telling was slightly different, emphasizing different aspects depending on his audience, but the heart remained the same. Two children, acting from pure compassion, had created a moment of grace that touched everyone involved. He'd installed a small plaque near the locker that simply read, "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo the loudest." The incident also sparked important conversations about wildlife and urban development. The fact that a bear cub had wandered into a school highlighted the encroachment of human settlements on natural habitats. Environmental groups used Star's story to advocate for wildlife corridors and better urban planning. The tragic death of Star's mother became a rallying cry for safer road designs in areas where wildlife was known to cross. From one small incident, larger changes began to take shape. The local news did annual follow-ups on Star, Connor, and Lily. These updates became beloved traditions, reminding the community of the power of compassion and the importance of wildlife conservation. When Star was spotted with cubs of her own 5 years later, the celebration was community-wide. The little orphan had not just survived but thrived, continuing the cycle of life that had nearly been broken. Connor, now in college, cried when he heard the news, feeling a sense of completion to a story he'd helped begin. Educational psychologists studied the incident, particularly interested in how Connor's autism had actually enhanced his ability to connect with the frightened animal. His different way of processing the world had led him to a solution that, while flawed, came from a place of deep empathy. This led to new understandings about neurodiversity and animal-assisted therapy, with Connor himself contributing to research papers on the subject. His unique perspective was no longer seen as a deficit, but as a valuable, different way of understanding the world. The story took on new dimensions as the years passed. During a particularly divisive time in the country, someone shared the story online with the caption, "If a toddler and a bear cub can find common ground, what's our excuse?" It went viral, reminding people that compassion transcends all boundaries. Political commentators on both sides of the aisle cited it as an example of what America could be at its best, a place where kindness matters more than differences. Religious leaders incorporated the story into sermons about compassion and stewardship. Philosophers debated its implications for human-animal relationships. Child development experts used it to illustrate the innate empathy of children. Each group found their own meaning in the simple tale of a scared cub, a brave toddler, and a boy who tried to help. The story became a mirror, reflecting back what each person needed to see about the power of kindness. But for Jessica, sitting in her classroom years later, now with gray streaking through her hair and laugh lines earned from decades of teaching, the story remained personal. She kept a photo on her desk from that day, a blurry shot of Lily and the cub, two babies comforting each other in a harsh world. When students struggled, when she felt overwhelmed by the challenges of education, she'd look at that photo and remember, sometimes the most profound lessons come not from textbooks, but from moments of pure, unexpected grace. She'd taught thousands of students over her career, but none had taught her as much as Lily and Connor had that day. They'd shown her that compassion doesn't always follow rules, that kindness doesn't always make sense, and that sometimes the best thing an adult can do is recognize when a child's heart knows better than an adult's head. The tears she'd shed that day, the tears they'd all shed, weren't just about a bear cub in a locker. They were about recognizing the beauty of pure empathy, the power of innocent love, and the hope that such compassion represents for the world. As she prepared for retirement, Jessica made sure the story was properly documented in the school's archives. She interviewed everyone involved, collected photos and videos, compiled news articles and letters. This wasn't just a cute story to be forgotten. It was a piece of history that needed to be preserved. Future generations of students deserved to know that magic had happened in their hallway, that ordinary children had done something extraordinary simply by following their hearts. The retirement ceremony was emotional, with both Lily and Connor, now young adults, returning to honor the teacher who'd been part of their story. Connor spoke eloquently about how Ms. Brooks' understanding and support had changed his life, how she'd seen his attempt to save the cub not as misbehavior, but as misdirected compassion. Lily, poised and confident, talked about the lessons she'd learned that day without even knowing she was learning them. Lessons about bravery and kindness that had shaped her entire life. But the surprise guest was the one who brought everyone to tears. Sarah, from the Wildlife Center, arrived with a special video message. It was recent footage of Star, now a magnificent adult bear, teaching her own cubs to forage in the forest. The resemblance was unmistakable, that white star still visible on her chest. But what made everyone gasp was what the camera captured next. Star leading her cubs to a particular rock, the same rock where she'd left Lily's stuffed rabbit years ago. She sniffed around it, as if remembering, then moved on with her babies. It was probably coincidence, but to everyone watching, it felt like Star was showing her children where kindness had saved her life. The story could end there, with tears and celebration, with lives changed and lessons learned. But the truth is, stories like this don't really end. They continue in every act of kindness inspired by them, in every child who hears the tale and decides to help rather than harm, in every adult who remembers that compassion is always the right choice. Star's cubs would grow up and have cubs of their own. Lily and Connor would have children who'd hear the story from a personal perspective. And somewhere, in some school, another child would face a choice between fear and kindness. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'd remember the story of the bear cub in the locker and choose love. The hallway at Riverside Elementary still echoes with the footsteps of children, still witnesses the daily dramas and triumphs of childhood. But those who know the story say it feels different there, warmer somehow, as if the walls themselves remember the magic that happened. The locker still stands. The mural still brightens the wall. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. The soft humming of a little girl, the frightened whimper of a lost cub, and the quiet sound of two hearts recognizing each other across the vast divide of species. This is why the teachers cried that day. Not from fear or frustration, but from witnessing something pure and perfect, something that reminded them why they became teachers in the first place. They cried because in a world that often seems dark and divided, two children and a bear cub had created a moment of perfect light. They cried because they recognized truth when they saw it. That love is the most powerful force in the universe, and it can show up anywhere, even in a school locker on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The legacy of that day lives on in countless ways. Every child who chooses kindness over cruelty, every adult who remembers to see the world through compassionate eyes, every creature that receives help when it needs it most, they all carry a piece of that story forward. It reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear tiny sneakers and carry stuffed rabbits. Sometimes they're different from others, seeing the world in unique ways. And sometimes they're just ordinary people who recognize magic when it happens and have the wisdom to let it unfold. Years from now, when Lily and Connor are old, when Star's great-great-grandcubs roam the forest, when Riverside Elementary has been rebuilt twice over, the story will still be told. Details might change, names might be forgotten, but the heart of it will remain. Kindness matters. Compassion transcends boundaries. And sometimes the smallest acts of love can change the world. The teachers who cried that day weren't just witnessing a sweet moment. They were seeing humanity at its best, innocence in its purest form, and love in its most universal expression.